All right, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into something totally fascinating. We're looking at The Concrete Off-Ramp Grace, which is this brilliant novel written under the composite pen name Elias W.F.J. Thorne. Now, what makes this book an absolute masterpiece is how it uses architectural engineering as a literal, physical metaphor for intergenerational trauma. It asks a really profound question. What actually happens when the built environment remembers the very things that people living inside it are trying so desperately to forget? So we're going to conduct a sort of architectural autopsy on this story and see exactly how a building's geometry can literally inherit the sins of the past.
To do this, we're going to navigate the text just like a set of blueprints. We'll start at the surface for observation, dig down into the substrate for our investigation, uncover the load for the big revelation, and finally, hit the separation joint for the resolution. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the surface. Let's look at what the Voss family actually experiences when they first move into their brand new, ultra-modern house at 14 Meridian Close.
Right away, there is this massive striking contrast between expectation and reality. You've got the real estate developer's pitch, which uses all this clinical, utopian marketing speak. They sold the house as a curated environment for intentional living that was supposedly designed for intergenerational flourishing. It's pitched as a flawless, modern sanctuary, right? But then, compare that to the terrifying reality recorded in a hidden ledger by the previous owner, an engineer named Elias Thorne. He doesn't describe a sanctuary at all. He describes the house as a vessel of accumulated pressure and archived violence. He explicitly notes that the house is remembering something it was absolutely not designed to hold.
And you can literally see that memory manifesting on the surface. Get this. At exactly 4:14 p.m. every single day, the light coming through the modern skylight in the central atrium hits a very specific configuration. The shadows perfectly, and I mean perfectly, replicate the exact shape of a church nave. The house, entirely on its own, performs this daily architectural ritual. So the father, Daniel Voss, who's a super practical, logical man, realizes with this growing, quiet dread that his modern home is behaving like a secular reliquary.
To explain this, the authors introduce a completely fascinating concept called the archival grotesque. Now, this isn't your standard haunted house with ghosts or flying objects. It's actually way more unsettling than that. The archival grotesque means a building is haunted by the sheer, factual residue of what happened in its exact geographic coordinates. It literally contains more time than it appears to.
Which brings us to part 2, the substrate. Daniel Voss is a practical architectural engineer, so he can't just ignore this stuff. He treats it as a structural problem. When he maps out the site's history, it reveals a chronological palimpsest. Back in 1951, a Catholic church called St. Anselm's is built right on this site. Fast forward to 1982, and there's a massive cover-up of horrific abuse committed by the local priest. By 2011, the church is deconsecrated and completely demolished. Then in 2019, the new Meridian Close housing development goes up. But here is the critical detail. The new house wasn't just built on the empty lot. To save some money, the developers poured the brand new concrete slab directly over the existing, continuous concrete footings of that demolished church.
Naturally, Daniel wants hard proof, so he brings home a Schmidt hammer, which is a specialized tool used to test the density of concrete, and his tests yield this horrifying discovery. While the surrounding slab reads totally normal for brand new 2019 concrete, the readings in the northwest atrium corner and the east corridor are significantly higher, meaning the material in those specific spots is decades older and much denser. His clinical tests definitively prove the old church concrete wasn't destroyed at all. It was seamlessly incorporated right into the new slab. The two structures are physically continuous.
This leads to a really wild architectural concept known as thermic memory. Older concrete actually has a totally different thermal mass profile than newer concrete, meaning it holds onto and releases heat differently. And this perfectly explains a really creepy detail. Daniel's anxious son Marcus keeps being found sleeping peacefully on the inexplicably warm concrete floor of the east corridor. The kid is literally laying his body down on the 40-year-old footprint of the old church nave. The novel uses this to brilliantly illustrate how bodies store and radiate inherited trauma, finding this bizarre comfort in the physical warmth of the very substrate that damaged them.
But what exactly is that older concrete holding on to? Let's move to Section 3, the load, to uncover the revelation here.
So in normal architectural terms, a load-bearing element is just a physical component that carries weight down through a building to its foundation. But in the context of this story, the unsaid secrets of the past are acting as actual structural loads. Specifically, we're talking about the dark secrets sealed away inside a restricted diocesan file marked DA 1981-0034. These hidden, buried truths are physically and psychologically bearing down on the modern-day occupants, and it's literally causing the structure of their family to crack.
And here is where the horrifying revelation connects everything together. It turns out both Mara's father, Henrik, and the previous owner's father, W.F. Thorne, were lay administrators at that exact church back in the 1970s. Both of these men knew all about the horrific abuse being committed by Father Brower. Both of them remained totally silent for years, and both ultimately gave statements that were just buried in that sealed file. So Daniel and Mara didn't just stumble into a haunted house by accident. Their family structure is literally built directly on top of the silence and complicity of Mara's own father.
The house is remembering something it was not designed to hold. That quote just hits so incredibly hard once you know the full truth, doesn't it? The physical symptoms of the house, especially this tiny 0.8 millimeter fissure that keeps appearing in the atrium concrete, they perfectly visualize the collision between structural engineering and haunting. The concrete is quite literally cracking under the unbearable crushing weight of all this inherited silence.
So how do you actually fix a structure that's cracking under the weight of its own foundation? That brings us to our final section, the separation joint and the resolution.
Daniel ends up calling in a structural engineer, Dr. Okonkwo, who identifies the core issue as a cold joint. A cold joint is basically a structural seam between old and new concrete where the two different pores just fail to bond perfectly. But this defect, this literal seam between the past and the present, becomes the exact perfect line where physical intervention and ultimately a kind of structural grace can finally enter the building.
Dr. Okonkwo's solution is a physical remediation called a separation joint. They bring a crew in to literally cut along that cold joint line with an industrial diamond saw, pump a compressible foam filler into the gap, and basically allow the old and new concrete masses to just move independently of one another. And this physical fix is the novel's brilliant practical answer to trauma. You don't try to completely destroy or erase the past. You just acknowledge it. But you engineer a deliberate way to stop it from carrying the new structure's load. You separate the masses so they stop destroying each other.
But right as the crew is cutting deep into the floor of the atrium, at the exact geographic coordinates of the old church altar, the saw suddenly hits a void in the concrete. And inside this hidden void is a literal time capsule. It was left by the previous owner's father, W.F. Thorne, secretly placed there during the new home's construction. Inside, they find his 1982 Deacon stole and a handwritten confession letter, all tucked inside a little tin box.
In this letter, the dying man wrote, "The concrete only held what we refused to say." And honestly, that captures the entire core theme of the book right there. The architecture itself was never evil. It wasn't malevolent. It was literally just doing what buildings do. It was holding weight. It was simply holding the heavy silence of the guilty men who built it, just waiting for someone brave enough to finally speak the actual truth out loud.
And that is exactly what Mara does. To perform this final, ultimate structural release, she stands right at the exact coordinate of the old altar, and she speaks the 7 victims' names aloud into the empty atrium. And look at the immediate aftermath. Their daughter, Sophie, who had been drawing these haunting floor plans, suddenly starts sketching normal people again. Marcus stops sleeping on the creepy warm foundation and goes back to his own bed. And most importantly, that 0.8 millimeter crack in the atrium concrete, it finally stops expanding. The house is finally allowed to settle.
Which finally brings us to the true meaning of the book's title, The Concrete Off-Ramp Grace. The authors completely redefine the word grace here. It's not some soft, divine, peaceful intervention. Structural grace is described as a violent, engineered exit from a structure that cannot otherwise be left. It's the abrupt, sudden impossibility of remaining as you were. It is quite literally the diamond saw cutting through the floor of your life so you can finally move independently of your past.
And that leaves us with a truly profound question to consider today. If you look closely at the structures you've built your own life upon, are the foundations of your life carrying loads that actually belong to someone else's architecture? What unspoken histories are you sleeping on, and what kind of structural joint do you need to cut to finally let them go? Just take a moment to really think about that. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.